Welcome to today's live webinar for the release of the nation's report card, Writing 2011, Grades 8 and 12. I'm Crovo, Deputy Executive Director of the National Assessment Governing Board and moderator for today's event. The board is an independent, bipartisan board that sets policy for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, also called NAEP or the nation's report card. To hear results from the first ever national computer-based NAEP writing assessment. The special release represents much more than writing scores. It represents a new era for NAEP that takes into account the increasing role of computer technology. In fact, this state-of-the-art assessment used computers and word processing tools comparable to those used in our nation's colleges and workplaces. So what does this mean for all of you listening today? It means the context has changed dramatically for the way in which we now test writing. It means we have new insights and information on how students write. Not only will you find out how 8th and 12th grade students performed when asked to persuade, explain, or convey experiences to a specified audience, such as a college admission committee, you will learn about students' use of common word processing tools. We have a distinguished panel of experts that will share their thoughts and reactions to the 2011 Writing Report Card. Briefly introduce each of our speakers, and our webinar producer will review the meeting logistics. The first speaker will be Jack Buckley, Commissioner of the National Center for Education Statistics. He will present the NAEP Writing 2011 Grade 8 and 12 results. Our three speakers have been involved with NAEP and writing specifically for many years. Sue Mintel is an educational consultant and vice chair-elect of the National Assessment Governing Board. Sue served on the governing board since 2007. Today, she will take an in-depth look at some issues behind the results and the gender gap. Sue will also discuss the parallels of this writing assessment to the assessments being planned for the Common Core state standards. She helped to develop as leader of the Common Core's English Language Arts and Literacy team. Next, we have Arthur Appleby, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center on English Language Learning and Achievement at the University at Albany, State University of New York. Arthur served as co-chair of the committee that developed the writing framework and specifications for his assessment. He will address the realities of computer use that change NAEP. Arthur will also explore student readiness for the assessment, about how high-scoring and low-scoring writers approach drafting and revision, the digital divide, and integrating computer tasks into curriculum and instruction. And finally, we will hear from Beverly Chin, Director of the English Teaching Program in the Department of English at the University of Montana, Missoula, who also served as Senior Project Consultant on the NAEP 2011 Writing Framework. She will discuss the definition of writing that guided this assessment and possible correlations between classroom computer use and scores. They will also address the benefits of using tools to facilitate writing, the importance of providing computer access to all students, and how educators can apply today's results. Following Beverly's remarks, we will have a brief question and answer session with all attendees and speakers. To begin, Jennifer, our webinar producer, will list logistics for using the WEC system.
Cornelia, speakers will address questions during a Q&A session later in the event, but it's welcome to submit their questions throughout the entire presentation. Simply your question into the Q&A window at the lower right side of your WEC screen and submit to all panelists. Please to include your name and organization with all questions. If you have technical issues, please refer to your confirmation email or call 866-229-3239. Please note that live closed captioning is also available in the bottom right corner of your screen. Please click the X on the blue bar at the top of the media viewer if you'd like to close the captioning panel. Back to you, Cornelia.
Thank you. This is Mary. I'm substituting for Cornelia today. Now it is my pleasure to welcome our first speaker. Jack Buckley is the Commissioner of the National Center for Education Statistics. From his position as a Professor of Applied Statistics at NYU, he is well known for his research on school choice, particularly related to charter schools, and on statistical methods for public policy. Jack served as Deputy Commissioner of NCES from 2006 to 2008. He spent 5 years in the U.S. Navy as a surface warfare officer and nuclear reactor engineer, and also worked in the intelligence community as an analytic methodologist. Jack, we look forward to your remarks.
All right, well, thanks, Mary. I'm very happy to be here today to share with you all the results of the 2011 Writing Report Card, our first computer-based writing assessment. The assessment was administered in early 2011 at grades 8 and 12 only. The samples included about 24,000 8th graders and 28,000 12th graders. And the assessment was conducted at the national level only and includes both public and private school students. We report results in two ways, as average scale scores on the 0 to 300 point scale, in this case with a separate scale for each grade, and percentages of students at each of the three achievement levels, basic, proficient, and advanced. These achievement levels were developed by the National Assessment Governing Board, who sets the standards for what students should know and be able to do. For each subject in each grade, the Governing Board has established standards for basic, proficient, and advanced performance. Also, their policy goal is to have all students performing at or above the proficient level. Although the 2011 assessment uses new technology that differs significantly from what we did in previous assessments, we can't make comparisons back to the past results. And so, the first assessment in the new series, we set the average score for both grade 8 and grade 12 at 150. In this assessment, students are presented with tasks that reflect grade-appropriate real-world issues and are designed to measure one of three communicative purposes: to persuade, in order to change the reader's point of view or affect the reader's action; to extend, in order to expand the reader's understanding; or to convey experience, real or imagined, in order to communicate individual and imagined experience to others. These are the three purposes and gives the overall time allotted to each purpose by grade. As you can see, the percentage of students' time devoted to the three purposes was different for the two grades, with the third purpose, convey experience, receiving somewhat greater emphasis at grade 8. The writing tasks students received fell into one of these three categories. And in addition, each task specified or implied a particular audience that corresponded in some way to the task. To be effective, writers must have an awareness of their intended reader's needs and level of knowledge about the writer's topic. For student responses, we have to take into account the fact that what they're providing us is essentially a first draft. Our received special training to ensure consistency in scoring for all responses. A certain percentage of these responses were scored twice by different scorers to ensure that they were indeed producing consistent results. And each response was given one of 6 possible skill ratings, running from effective down to little or no skill. Students evaluated using holistic scoring rubrics whose criteria were based on 3 broad features of writing: development of ideas, organization of ideas, and language facility and conventions. There were innovations in the 2011 writing assessment. First, tasks were presented to students in multimedia formats, including both audio and video presentations, and we'll have some examples of that later on today. Students used word processing software to compose and edit responses, and I'll show you what that looked like in a moment. It collected extensive information on 24 separate student actions, including keystrokes, backspacing, deletions, and the use of spell checking. And all because the 2011 writing assessment was computer-based, we're able to take advantage of what is called universal design, which allows us to build into the software program used by all students a variety of features to accommodate special needs students, both those with disabilities and English language learners. All students can take advantage of these features if they wish, and we'll give some information on how they use them later on. In these accommodations that were incorporated into universal design, however, some accommodations were still available only to special needs students. So to get a quick idea of what students were working with, This is a sample grade 8 writing task that featured an audio prompt, and we'll return to this particular task later. It asks to immerse themselves in an imaginative situation and to write about it as if from personal experience. Listen to an audio recording of atmospheric sounds while reading a few sentences from an imaginary journal. The first sentence of the text that students read was as follows. First arrived on the island, we saw mountains and fields with lots of colorful flowers and large, strange-looking trees. Students read the passage. The audio provides the sound of waves lapping on the shore, the squawking of birds, as well as the sound of footsteps in the sand to create a sense of the island world that the students were to imagine exploring. Let's do a sample of what they heard. Wrote their response in the right half of the window, allowing them to refer to the prompt at all times. Each completed 2 prompts during the course of their participation in the assessment. Let's turn to results for grade 8. But before we do, let me remind you, as always, that NAEP results are based on samples, which means there's a margin of error associated with each or percentage. So we'll only identify those differences in scores or percentages that meet our standard for statistical significance. And since our results refer to the NAEP achievement levels, let me remind you briefly what they are. The achievement level denotes partial mastery of prerequisite knowledge and skills that are fundamental for proficient work at each grade. Proficient represents solid academic performance. Students reaching this level have demonstrated competency over challenging subject matter. Advanced represents superior performance. The bar chart shows achievement level results for grade 8 students. The percentages who were below basic, at proficient, and at advanced. As you can see, 27% of students were at or above the proficient level when we combine percentages for the top 2 categories, which is shown by the portion of the bar to the right of the vertical line dividing basic from proficient. 54% of students were at basic, while 20% were below basic. Those in NAEP, we also disaggregate by race, ethnicity, among other factors. This figure shows the scores in 2011 for the 7 racial ethnic groups for which NAEP now collects separate data. Scores each group can be compared to the national average of 150 as well as to one another. So students with an average score of 165 scored higher in 8th grade than all other groups. To the left bars, you can see the percentage of students in each category. So for example, in 2011, 50% of 8th graders were white, while 14% were black, and 20% were Hispanic. Here we show differences in average score by gender. The average score for female 8th graders in 2011 was 160, 9 points higher than the average score for male 8th graders when we're using unrounded numbers. We can't compare 2011 scores with those in higher assessments of writing by NAEP. We can say that female students have had consistently higher scores than male students at all grades on prior writing assessments. NAEP and eligibility for the National School Lunch Program as a measure or a proxy of family income or socioeconomic status. Students who have an income that is less than 185% of the federal poverty level are eligible for free or reduced price lunches, while those whose families are above 185% are not eligible. In 2011, grade 8, students who were eligible scored lower than students who were not by 27 points. Eligible students constituted 42% of all 8th graders in 2011. In addition to assessing students' writing ability, the 2011 writing assessment included a questionnaire filled out by teachers of the participating students, which contained questions about classroom practices and other topics. Some things teachers were asked how often they asked their students to use computers to draft and revise their writing. As opposed to students whose teachers more frequently asked them to use the computer to draft and revise their writing, scored higher than those whose teachers did so less frequently. So, for example, students who said they never or hardly ever asked their students to make such use of their computers had an average score of 141, at least 5 points below any of the other categories. The 8th graders, about 44%, had teachers who said they asked students to use computers to draft and revise their writing either very often or almost always or always. Maybe that asking students to using computers for their writing actually improves their writing skills, but other factors that could affect student performance, and as always, NAEP is not designed to identify the causes of that performance. For example, it could also be that computer-based instruction is more prevalent in higher income areas, or teachers with high-performing students are more likely to ask those students to use computers. We look at this a little bit by trying to control or disaggregate by an additional factor. This slide shows that regardless of income, performance does tend to increase with the frequency with which their teachers ask them to use computers to draft and revise their writing. In the lower-hand corner, we see that the average score of lower-income students whose teachers reported never or hardly ever asking them to use computers for their writing was 130. On the right, we see that the average score of lower-income students whose teachers reported always or almost always asking them to use computers was 141. The shaded area in this case represents a 95% confidence range for the estimated scores. The top of the graph shows a similar increase for students from higher income families, with the scores running from 155 up to 167. Here with grade 8 writing task that we showed you earlier. 50% of students provided responses whose ratings fell in the top 3 categories: effective, competent, or adequate. Furthermore, 76% selected the spell check icon at least once, 13% used the cut icon at least once, 7% used the text-to-speech function at least once. This is a universal design feature that allows them to hear a spoken version of written text. The assessment allows students to listen to this writing prompt, as I just said, instead of reading it via this text-to-speech tool. The graph actually shows the average scores for students who did not use this tool at all compared to those who used it once, twice, or 3 or more times. As you can see, increasing use of the text-to-speech tool is correlated with, on average, lower scores. Now the results for grade 12. Here are achievement level results for grade 12. As was with grade 8, 27% of students were at or above proficient, 24% at proficient, and 3% at advanced. 20% were below basic, while 52% were at basic. Here are the scores in 2011 at the 12th grade for the 7 NAEP racial ethnic groups. In the 12th grade case, white, Asian, and multiracial students actually had average scores that were comparable with each other and were higher than the remaining groups except for the Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander students. Looking at the gap in 12th grade, again, the average score for female 12th graders was or certainly larger than that of males. In this case, girls scored at 157, 14 points higher than the average score for boys. NAEP assessments also asked students to select the highest educational level completed by each of their parents, using these 5 categories supplied by NAEP. In our process, we grouped students according to the highest educational level attained by either parent. And as the bar graph shows, across all our other assessments, higher educational attainment by a parent is associated with higher scores on NAEP. 9% of students said neither parent graduated from high school, and the average score for these students was 129. By comparison, 49% said at least one parent graduated from college, and their average score was 160. We asked grade 12 students how many pages they wrote in a typical week for homework in their English language arts class. Those who wrote 4 to 5 pages had an average score that was higher than the average of students who said they wrote fewer than 4 pages. 30% of students said they wrote none or up to 1 page in a typical week. Results can't tell us if requiring students to write 4 or 5 pages a week for homework will improve scores, however, because it could be possible, for example, that high-performing students are more likely to write more pages on their own. We asked students on the assessment how often during the school year they used a computer to make changes to a paper or report. In 12th graders who reported more frequent use of a computer to edit their writing had higher average writing scores than those who reported less frequent use. Students who said they always always or almost always used a computer to edit their writing, had a higher average score than students who said they did so less frequently. 6% of students were in this top category. Shows a grade 12 writing task. This task asks students to watch a short video about young people's use of technology. They were asked to write an essay for a college admissions committee about one kind of information or communications technology that they used. They were asked to describe this technology and explain what was important to them. Watch the video.
Text message. How do you use technology?
So close your eyes and imagine a video. We provided some data through charts and various graphics, and then asked students using those data to describe their own personal use of technology in the context of a college admissions essay. 20% of students provided responses on this particular task that were rated either effective or competent. Some of the other use of the technology or the interface, 74% accessed spell check by using the right-click option on the computer mouse. 30% used the thesaurus, and 50% used the text-to-speech function. As the grade 12 writing assessment allowed access to a thesaurus, this graph shows the average scores for students who did not access the tool, those who accessed it once, and those who accessed it more than once. 6% of students never used the tool. Those who did scored higher, and those who used it at least twice had higher scores than those who used it only once. So in conclusion, the 2011 Writing Report Card provides all this information and much more. Additionally, the initial release website gives extensive information on the performance of students, access to released assessment questions and student responses at all 6 rating levels through NAEP's Question Center. The NAEP Explorer, our online data analysis tool, allows extensive further analysis of student performance as well. And as always, I would like to offer sincere thanks to all the students, teachers, and schools who made this possible through their participation in the 2011 Writing Assessment.
Jack. Our next speaker, Susan Pintel, is an education analyst and standards and curriculum specialist. For nearly 3 decades, has helped numerous states and districts in Arizona, California, Indiana, Louisiana, Ohio, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C. work together to advance education reform and change tools for standard setting, curriculum building, assessment alignment, and teacher development. So works with Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers, or PARC, as the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, to ensure that assessment claims, emphases, and item development reflect the Common Core state standards. Of the National Assessment Governing Board, serves on the Assessment Development and Nominations Committees, and become the board's vice chair on October 1st. Since 2001, she has served as chief architect of the American Diploma Project, designed to close the gap between high school demands and post-secondary expectations. So look forward to your insights.
Thanks much, Mary, and good morning to all. And as Mary stated, the place I'd like to start my comments is to draw the parallels between the Common Core State Standards and the NAEP Writing Framework. In fact, when we write in the Common Core State Standards, we drew heavily from both the NAEP Reading and Writing Frameworks. The first place you'll see this, next slide, I'm sorry, can you, someone else slide? Sure. So the first thing you'll notice is that the Common Core stresses development of the same 3 mutually reinforcing writing capacities. So argumentative writing, or what NAEP calls persuasive writing, explanatory writing, and writing to convey experiences, or what the Common Core calls narrative writing. Notice that the Common Core reflects the overwhelming emphasis that NAEP places on writing arguments and informative and explanatory text at the high school level. We use the same percentages, 40% for arguments, 40% for writing to inform and explain, and 20% for writing to convey experiences. I asked a special question of the data. I wanted to see the analysis to see if students were writing to convey experiences or writing to explain or writing arguments, which were students doing better in one or the other. And in fact, the special analysis shows that more students are able to write a story or convey an experience confidently than they are able to write a sound, explanatory, persuasive text. And I just want to underscore this because it's just to the fact that NAEP really emphasizes argument writing and writing to inform and explain. Those really are college and career-ready skills because they require students to use evidence and logic as they move forward. Next slide. I want to just underscore what a historic event this was in 2011. NAEP really led the nation here in assessing writing on computers, and how important it is to have a NAEP really take the lead here. As I've worked with Park and Smarter Balance, there have been some concerns about assessing students on computers, and would that be unfair? And, you know, would it mask sort of deeper issues? And one of the things that is interesting, while we can't compare results from this assessment because it was on computers versus paper and pencil, but what is interesting is that the 2011 data show the same patterns, if you will, on the strengths and weaknesses of paper and pencil tests. So that's promising. In other words, there weren't other sorts of patterns that came up or new information that came up that would make us worried. Obviously, there's the data there that shows that students who are more familiar with computers and keyboarding are doing better, and that would be to be expected. Next slide, please. To recap really quickly, at both grades 8 and 12, we have a little more than half of the students scoring at the basic achievement level, and only a quarter of our nation's students really scoring where we need them to score at sort of that solid academic performance at the proficient level. Gaps persist as we would, as we've seen by race, ethnicity, poverty, and parent education. But next slide, please. I'd like to do really, though, is focus on the gender gap because it is stark. The gap between female and male students in reading is greater than in any other subject. Math and science, males do better, but only slightly. In reading, girls do better, but the gap is not as wide. I want to draw your attention to the 8th grade here of 36% of girls are scoring at or above proficient, with only 17% of boys are. Please. Again, NAEP can't say why. We can't do cause and effect, but there are some noteworthy background variables. According to the questionnaires, and I found this really interesting, 53% of female students in grade 12 agree or strongly agree with the statement that writing is one of my favorite activities. For males, just 35% agree. Now, it isn't clear whether writing well comes first or enjoying writing comes first. You know, sort of the chicken and the egg. I enjoy writing because I write well, or vice versa. But it was interesting that the percentage was so stark between the two. Girls also report writing more than boys, both for homework and on their own. And like most everything else students do, like most everything else we do as human beings, writing really does improve with practice. And so I think this is an important background variable to watch as we move forward. Next slide, please. I want to bring up two other noteworthy background variables. As Jack said, the NAEP data shows that students who write 4 to 5 pages a week for English language arts homework scored higher than those who write fewer pages. One of the statistics that I found troubling was that only 39% of 12th graders overall report writing just 1 page of homework or less each week for English language arts. In my mind, that's not enough, and because we know that practice makes perfect. In this case, perhaps practice makes proficient. And when we look at only a quarter of our students reaching proficient, and knowing that so much of the success in our economy is increasingly based on knowledge and information, the ability to communicate that effectively in writing becomes all the more important. So as we move forward here, I know as an educator and someone who works with schools and districts and states across the nation, I'll be keeping in mind that boys are lagging behind girls substantially. What's that about? And really thinking, too, about the amount of writing, the regularity of writing that goes on in classrooms as we implement the Common Core. And that, Mary, I'll send it back to you.
Our third speaker, Dr. Arthur Appleby, has worked in institutional settings with public school children with severe learning problems as a staff member of the National Council of Teachers of English, and in research and professional education. Focuses on how children and adults learn the many specialized forms of language required for success. Books and articles address issues in curriculum and instruction in reading, writing, and English language arts. Since the 1970s, he has also worked extensively with the National Assessment of Educational Progress as support author and consultant for framework and item development. Thank you for joining us today, Arthur.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here today and see so many years of work to such a successful fruition in this assessment. There's several points I'd like to highlight about where we are today. First, as others have said, this assessment really is a milestone in large-scale writing assessment. Over decades, two things had become increasingly clear. First, that students were making use of computers and other kinds of digital devices in greatly increased numbers over the years. The sort of common metaphor is that they've become digital natives and the rest of us are still digital immigrants. That experience, combined with the fact that both higher education and workplaces with better paying positions take computer use for granted. Students leave high school and go to higher education or the workplace without the ability to write on a computer are severely disadvantaged. These two things came together to make the format for this assessment both necessary and possible. The point is that the students were clearly ready. At both grades 8 and 12, they used the keyboard effectively. They produced interesting writing, response to a wide range of prompts addressed to a wide range of audiences. Whether they could touch type, they typed their responses and made good use of the various tools that were built into the word processor, spell check and backspace, for example, to modify their writing. People had worried, as said, people are worried now with the assessments for the Common Core, that students weren't ready, but those worries were wrong. Third is that this new computer-based assessment opens up a whole wealth of new information for us, adding to our understanding of how better and poor writers approach drafting and revision. For grade 12, writers made more use of the backspace key, suggest perhaps that they were self-monitoring and making immediate corrections than their lower-performing peers. Similarly, higher performers were more likely to right-click to access spell check, again suggesting more self-monitoring. What these behaviors mean for curriculum instruction, for the teaching of writing, is something that we'll have to work out over the coming years, but it gives us a wealth of new information to begin to build from. The point I want to look at is the question of a digital divide. An assessment like this raises the question, does NAEP penalize students whose families can't afford a computer? The answer seems to be no. NAEP's own preliminary studies before they moved to this assessment showed that if you assessment with paper and pencil or on the computer, the pattern differences between subgroups remain the same. The computer doesn't seem to penalize or advantage any one group in comparison with another. Individual students, of course, might do better or worse. And other research has shown that computer use in writing is particularly helpful for low-achieving students and special education students who benefit from the word processing platform. As you might expect, students report experience using computers did better on the assessment. The right-hand graph on the slide in front of you saw before from the 12th grade results in this assessment. That's interpreted as saying, well, it's a very predictable result. If you use the computer more, you're going to do better on a computer-based assessment. But it's really more complicated and interesting than that. The graph on the left-hand side shows a parallel set of results from the 2007 assessment, where the students were writing with pencil. Same pattern. Those reported that in their everyday school experiences that they were more likely to use a computer for writing, did better on the assessment in a very parallel. What seems to be happening is that higher achieving students tend to use computers more often, and they do better on writing assessments, whether or not they're handwritten or computer-based. The last point I'd like to make is that this assessment sends a really important message to teachers and schools. As computers become widespread in the out-of-school lives of our students, they've stayed somewhat limited in their use in most schools. Assessment of how well students write may have a word processing platform available makes clear that such tasks need to be integrated into curriculum and instruction. In contrast, for in-pencil assessments that in most of the state assessment frameworks at the moment send exactly the opposite message and lead schools and teachers to limit computer use because they're worried that their students will be penalized because the high-stakes tests are handwritten. As on a computer becomes more widespread, it opens up endless possibilities for enriching instruction, ranging from the wealth of materials available to students on the internet to the exploration of emerging genres in digital media that students are already accessing on their outside of school. In the past has often been at the leading edge of assessment development, models which states have adopted in their own testing. With this assessment, NAEP again put itself at the leading edge in the redefinition of writing achievement as writing with word processing tools and in options for accommodations such as text-to-speech that we talked about before, and the enrichment of writing prompts with audio and video effects that are difficult or impossible on a paper and pencil assessment. Right, back to you.
Thank you, Arthur. Final speaker, Dr. Beverly Chin, has 35 years of experience as an English language arts teacher, adult education instructor, and teacher educator. A president of the National Council of Teachers of English and former board member of the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, she consults nationally and internationally on English language arts standards, curriculum, instruction, and assessment, and provided invaluable insight for our writing framework. Beverly, we are happy you're here with us today.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's a pleasure to be with you. Teacher, educator, and professional development consultant, I am dedicated to improving literacy education for all students. The nation's report card, Writing 2011, provides important information about the writing proficiency of students in 8th and 12th grades. Report card results also offers educators the opportunity to discuss this research and to consider ways to improve the writing performance of all students. I served as the senior project consultant to the NAEP 2011 writing framework. I'm excited by the definition of writing that guided this assessment. This is definition, quote, is a complex, multifaceted, and purposeful act of communication. It is accomplished in a variety of environments under various constraints of time and with a variety of language resources and technological tools, end quote. This definition presents writing as a flexible, generative, decision-making process and reflects the current practices and perspectives of writing instructors elementary through graduate school. Focusing on traditional genres or modes of writing, NAEP looked at how well students accomplish writing tasks for communicative purposes to specific audiences. NAEP's edition of its first computer-based writing assessment, we gained insight into the way that 8th grade and 12th grade students use technology to compose their writing. For example, we learned that 8th grade students whose teachers more frequently asked them to use the computer to draft and revise their writing scored higher than those whose teachers did so less frequently. Whose teachers never asked them to draft and revise their writing on a computer scored the lowest. We learned that 12th grade students who always or almost always use the computer to edit their writing scored higher on average than students who reported doing so very often, sometimes never, or hardly. These findings support the importance of integrating computers into writing instruction, teaching to show students how to use word processing features effectively and efficiently to plan, draft, revise, and edit their writing. These findings also support the need for schools to ensure access and availability to technology for students. If we want to provide high-quality writing instruction for all students, we need to ensure that students have these technology tools and learn how to use them so that they can be more successful in school, the workplace, and our society. This report card in 2011 also offers educators resources for professional development. Educators can use the NAEP writing rubrics to discuss how to create their own writing rubrics when assessing students' work at various grade levels and various subject areas. Also, examining the NAEP tasks, educators can see how the writing purpose and audience are presented to students. Through this computer-based assessment, writing tasks are now presented in multiple ways. Here, the sample of the 8th grade writing task to convey experience, real or imagined. And you also saw at the 12th grade level the use of animation to enable students to receive information and then their prompt to explain to a missions committee technology used in their own lives. With the computer, the writing tasks are presented now in multiple ways through the printed text, photographs, audio, video, and or animation. And with the tasks being delivered in these variety of modes, students may find the prompts more engaging and may be inspired to write more interesting ideas and make more effective language choices. Educators who participate in the development of writing assessments in their school, district, and or state can use the NAEP writing assessment as a model to inform their own decision-making processes. For example, in Montana, we have collaborated with classroom teachers, educators, state education agencies, and colleges and universities to develop a holistic rubric and writing prompts for the Montana University System writing assessment. From 2001 to 2012, this voluntary program provided workshops across the state that trained educators, including K-12 classroom teachers, pre-service teachers, and college composition instructors, apply this rubric to 11th grade students' persuasive writing. Over time, much of the writing has become word processed and computer-based. The quantitative and qualitative results of this project attest to the value of collaborative professional development that directly links writing assessment to writing instruction. This report card, Writing 2011, and related websites are essential resources for educators committed to the improvement of students' writing proficiencies. To discuss this report, we reflect on the instructional strategies that effectively teach students to become competent, confident writers. We can also make informed, research-based decisions of educational policies and and advocate for increased technological resources in our schools. Engaging educators, parents, policymakers, and the public in conversations about literacy, their responsibility, and support education for all students, for today and for the future.
Thank you for those comments. We'll respond to attendee questions during a brief question and answer session. Please submit your questions online, and our facilitator for this segment, Valerie Maripodi, will direct the questions to the appropriate speaker. Valerie?
Thank you, Mary. For those of you who have questions about today's report card results, please submit them now. As Jen mentioned, we ask that you direct your questions to all panelists. Please remember to include your name and organization when typing in your question. If able to respond to your question during the event today, please know that we will respond via email. Our first question is from Doug Wren. He is with Virginia Beach City Public Schools. He poses the question, with the advent of online writing assessments, many school districts are realizing that students will perform better on these tests with improved keyboarding skills. What are your thoughts on teaching keyboarding at the elementary school level? When should keyboarding instruction begin, and what should be taught at each grade level? Susan, would you like to take this?
And thanks for the we grappled with this when we were putting the Common Core together, and actually we put keyboarding skills in as early as third grade. Now that's with guidance and support from adults. And by fourth grade, the expectation is that students would demonstrate sufficient command of keyboarding skills so they would be able to type a minimum of 1 page, and then in grade 5 that gets expanded to 2 pages. And I just want to say a little aside here. When we were putting the Common Core together, developing the Common Core, we actually weren't sure exactly where to put keyboarding skills and didn't know, do we put it late in elementary school, do we put it in middle school, and we heard very strongly from the early childhood community to really begin students early on the internet and early with keyboarding. And we actually see some of that reflected in the writing standards as early as kindergarten, first and second grade. But keyboarding skills are actually don't appear until grade 3.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question is from Clifton Ogle. He provides his affiliation, but he is curious. As a result of the emphasis on testing, the curriculum has been narrowed to only those areas being tested, such as writing. Do you feel this is a contributing factor to some of the problems we are seeing with student preparation? Would you like to start that out for us?
Sure. I think the one is certainly right in its assumption that schools are focusing on the things that are being tested. What I like about national assessment throughout its history in assessing writing has been that, unlike many state assessments, it actually has students write at length in response to prompts. In many states, because of costs and because the technologies have been evolving slowly, assessed somewhat indirectly with multiple choice items of various sorts that are easily scored. But what happens in that case is, even though it's called an assessment of writing, instruction inevitably narrows when teachers are worried about how their students will do, and they focus on the kinds of things that are on the test. So I think this assessment in particular, with its emphasis both on standard writing and on the uses of computers, may help work against those narrowing tendencies.
And Duke, can I just add one point, just to underscore what Arthur has said about how NAEP has really been a leader here, and again, using NAEP's experience here and model for the nation. The Common Core is about reading and writing across the disciplines, so it's not just English language arts, and the hope is that in the assessment consortia, and my sense of it is that they are proceeding in this direction, that both Park and Smarter Balance are going to ask students to write in a variety of ways, even including research and writing there, extended writing as Arthur has suggested. So I think this will be a very important turn for our country as classrooms around the nation that are part of the Common Core and part of the consortia really include writing in science and in social studies, and also, of course, in English language arts classes and in technical subjects.
Thank you much, Arthur and Sue. Our next question is from Karen King. She is curious, were you able to look at relationships between the use of the text-to-speech tool and the ELL status of the students? Jack, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So we did, in fact, we are able to disaggregate the use of the text-to-speech tool by English language learner status. And the relationship that I discussed earlier, which was on average that students who used the tool more often scored lower on average, is actually something we see across groups. So if we disaggregate the overall student population to English language learners and non-English language learners, that is still the same. I mean, we also talk further a little bit about sort of just the absolute breakdown of students by whether or not they use the tool, if that's more to your question. For example, 40% of English language learner students in grade 8 use the text-to-speech tool 3 or more times compared to 31% of non-English language learners.
Thanks so much, Jack. Our question is from Dan Shaw. He is curious as to why grade 4 not assessed or results presented when it was part of the 2011 NAEP writing framework. Could you go ahead and address this question?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Valerie. The questioner is correct. Grade 4 is part of the NAEP writing framework. The assessment framework committee on which Arthur and Beverly served grappled long and hard with the question, as did the board. At the time, we determined that we were not quite sure whether fourth graders could engage in a computer-based writing assessment. There was not enough research evidence, nor was there solid state data. It was only being done in a very few states. The framework called for a special study of for writing on the computer to determine whether they had sufficient keyboarding skills, whether they could write sufficient amounts, whether they were comfortable in a computer-based environment. S did conduct that study in 2012 with a very large sample in the pilot study. Results are being analyzed now, but things look very promising for those of us who observed the fourth graders in the assessment, both in suburban, rural, and urban settings. Our total information looks like this. Students knew exactly what to do with the keyboard, with mouse, with word processing tools, and very excited about the findings. We hope to work with NCES to release some lessons learned from fourth grade writing pilot in the very near future. And the board is looking forward also to assessing fourth grade students using the computer-based assessment in the very near future.
Thank you, Mary. Our question is from Emily Hansford. She is wondering, how did public school students compare to private school students? I assume not statistically significant because it wasn't noted, but curious. Jack, any comments on that?
First, actually, it was a statistically significant difference. It's not that we any difference that I did note is statistically significant, but there are many other statistically significant differences that I didn't have time to note, and this is one of them. The 8th grade, for example, public school students on average had a score of 149, so right around the national average. Private school students had an average score of 164. That's about 8% of students. If we disaggregate down to Catholic private school students, which is about 4%, their score was 167.
Great. Thanks so much, Jack. Our question is from Veronica Brinson. She is wondering, how early should teachers start integrating word processing features in their writing instruction? Beverly, would you like to take a stab at this first?
Be delighted. When teachers have computers in the classroom, teachers can actually model ways in which students can use the technology tools to do pre-writing, where they're planning their compositions. Teachers can model for students and give them practice in how to not only draft their writing, but also to use the word processing features to do revision. Students can look how often they use the same sentence beginnings. Students can look at sentence lengths. They can do a search and replace function if they're looking for passive voice, such as the use of was and of other strong verbs, perhaps. And, of course, editing features can be used as students discover the use of capital letters and periods at the end of a sentence or question marks at the end of a question. So I think if teachers have the technology in their classrooms and then can project what's happening when they're using different features of the word processing technology tools, students can then learn those strategies. They can actually apply them themselves and work collaboratively to improve not only their writing processes, but to improve their final products. I think it's very important that teachers model it and give students opportunities to practice, so that the students actually internalize not only the writing processes, but the uses of technology to enhance their own thinking, composing processes.
So much, Beverly. Our next question is from Rhoda Bromodin, and I hope I said that right. Hearing any specific addresses for these resources, the NAEP rubrics or the tasks? Jack, do you have a comment on where people could go to find more information?
Absolutely. So the general overall web address is nces.ed.gov, so nces.ed.gov. If you go there, click on Data Tools, you'll see the NAEP's question tools, and then you can explore the releases from this assessment and interactive items, and even to yourself. Specifically for the rubrics and tasks, if you go to nces.ed.gov/Nations Report Card, all one word, /ITMRLSX/search.ASPX, that'll actually take you right there. But you know what? We can email that to you after this conference, and that would probably be easier than me trying to read the URL.
Great. All those tools are available. Follow up with you directly, Rhoda. Next question is from Gabe Flanagan. She is wondering, how do we address early writing engagement with boys? Panel, would anyone like to take that from me to start?
Well, Sue, I'll start, and I'm sure that Beverly and others may have other things to say. I think maybe two answers I have to this. One is just knowing that boys seem to be lagging, certainly when we get to grade 8 and grade 12, in terms of writing, means that as a teacher, I would want to really focus on that. As a school, I'd really want to see if our data shows that as well as we move forward. I would also say that, we've heard this in reading as well, that with more focus on informational text and expository writing, that there may be new and expanded ways to engage boys in writing. And I'd love to hear if Beverly and Arthur have anything to add on that.
I would love to contribute. I believe that when students, boys and girls, have authentic purposes for writing, there are real reasons to write, to communicate, and they see audiences who care about what the message is going to be, that we will, in fact, engage our boys and our girls. Students have to see writing as functional. Communication is functional. It's purposeful. And when we help students discover their reasons for writing and the audiences for their writing, and weave them into our days and our curriculum and our educational processes, I believe we will help all students improve their writing and write more frequently and write more meaningfully.
I have to just add to that the other thing that helps going forward is just the use of computers themselves for writing. And, we know from other research that achieving students, and the majority of those tend to be boys, do much better when they have access to a word processor, and they are engaged online in environments where they write and post messages that teachers and schools can begin to exploit once computers are integrated more fully into the activities.
So much. I know you all would want to weigh in on that question. Our last question of the day, unless I get a few more coming in through the Q&A window here, would be for Rosalind King. She is inquiring, what are the implications of the NAEP writing results for English writing and developmental education programs and instruction in higher education? Jack?
Jack, I'll try and take a stab at it. I mean, so of course, and Mary, you may wish to speak to this. The achievement levels, when they were set for writing, were not designed explicitly with something like college readiness or preparation in mind. Really, this is the sort of thing that's in the back of the minds of folks who are setting achievement levels on a 12th grade assessment. If you look, again, recall the distribution of achievement levels in 12th grade. You had 21% of our nation's 12th graders were below NAEP's basic level. Which means, writing in college almost certainly is going to be a challenge for these students. And 52% were at the basic level. There it really probably depends on the college and the nature of the program, whether or not they're ready or whether or not they require remediation. As noted in my remarks, of course, policy goal here set by the governing board is proficient. And I would to hazard a guess that folks are certain that if you're proficient on NAEP's 12th grade writing assessment, which is not an easy task for a lot of students, they would be ready for the writing demands at most colleges. And so I think it probably depends a lot on the particular post-secondary institution, but certainly the fact that so many students are below basic or just at basic, that there are a lot of students who arrive in post-secondary education not necessarily ready to write at the post-secondary level. And certainly the statistics I have on remedial coursework and on the kind of college course play test that students take when they arrive backs that up.
Mary, I'll add to that comment that Jack just made. Bring our audience to the board's 2011 writing framework that is on the governing board's website, and I commend the document to you. You'll notice the very unique composition of panel members who were part of that project. We had folks from industry sectors, from the military, and from levels of higher education. As with high school teachers, English language arts specialists, we really did look at what were the writing demands in higher education and the workplace, and to build those into the assessment design, into the scoring rubrics, and as Jack said, into the achievement levels. Now, we're not at this point making projections about whether students are prepared for level writing. I think that will be something the board will be examining in the very near future, and the framework is a solid one in order to use to do that. I also open this question up perhaps to Beverly and Arthur, since you have considerable experience working in higher education.
This is Beverly. Thank you so much, Mary. The project that I referred to here in Montana, the Montana University System Writing Assessment, really was addressing this connection, this concern, this bridge between our elementary, middle school, and high schools into college and university writing. We want to make sure that we have really clear communication about our expectations and our shared teaching strategies, as well as helping our students move through our educational system and have smooth bridges that we really assist our students in becoming the most effective which they can be. So it's very important for all to have those communications, collaborative, positive communications, where we actually look at samples of students writing, look at the rubrics that we use to give students feedback, look at the instructional strategies and processes we use to help our students at those varying points in their writing development to make sure that we really are helping every student become the most efficient, accomplished writer he or she can be. So those professional conversations and looking at student writing are just very essential, and NAEP plays a very large part in this process.
I would just echo that last point that too often in higher education there's simply an assumption that students are coming out of higher education already as proficient writers, but when the group of college instructors and through results and the experiences the students report as as responses to the background variables, it can shift expectations in a way that helps the higher education community deal more realistically with their students and realize that, in fact, writing is a long developmental process that has to continue in higher education as well.
Very much. Well, that's to be all the time we have left for questions today. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Mary Crovo.
Thank you, Laurie, and thanks to all who submitted a question. Let the end of the webinar today be the end of what you know about the NAEP 2011 Writing Assessment. I invite all of you to visit the websites of the Governing Board and the nation's report card, where you will find the speaker's comments, the writing framework, and examples of the computer-based writing prompts to which students responded. Also find, via the NAEP Data Explorer, additional information on the released writing prompts, the background questions, and keystroke data collected via this groundbreaking assessment. Remember, you become a follower of the Governing Board and NAEP on Facebook and Twitter and stay informed about our latest news and reports. Finally, I would like to thank Jack, Sue, Arthur, and Beverly for being with us today. I appreciate all of you for joining us for this release of the nation's report card in writing. Thank you.